Good afternoon, konnichiwa, haisai. Yes, bonjour, guten tag, I can't think of any more. Welcome to this afternoon session. It just disappeared there. Where have we gone? Nope. So thanks to our diamond sponsors. If you haven't been yet, to have a look around with the venue, do check them out. There's lots of goodies, particularly the picture A stand, some of the best stuff. But for now, we're just going to introduce our first speaker. My co-chair in the Biodiversity Crisis Response Committee, Alina, is going to be speaking about botanical Ecuadorian things. I'll let you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for everybody, and I'd like to invite my colleague, Diego. So we are going to do in two parts.
Just quickly, the second speaker on the program, Elizabeth Downey, unfortunately couldn't attend, so Diego is going to be taking her spot for the second talk, looking at mammals of Ecuador. Bonus talk.
In order to be within the time, I'm going to read the presentation. So, hi, I'm Alina Freire-Fierro. I am a botanist who, together with several colleagues, we have Diego Tirira, who is a mammologist, Rosa Batallas, who is a fungi specialist. Then we have Nora Oleas, who is a botanist. Then we have Cecilia Rodriguez, an ichthyologist. And then, oh, sorry, I should have been using this. So we have two colleagues who are ornithologists, Charlie Bott and Hector Cadena. Then Carmen Ulloa, some of you might know her. She's a botanist who works at the Missouri Botanical Garden. Then we have two entomologists, Fernanda Salazar, who works at Catholic University, and David Donoso, who works at Escuela Politécnica Nacional. So basically what we did is we did more or less a compilation of what's the situation regarding the status of the endemic taxa of the various groups in Ecuador. Regarding plants, Ecuador is one of the richest of the botanical countries, and we estimate there are about 19,000 vascular plant species, 5,000 of which are endemic to the country. In 2001, after local and international efforts, the first edition of a Red List was published. In 2011, 4,500 endemic species were assessed with a collaboration of 80 researchers from Ecuadorian and international herbaria. And a Red List was published. Actually, it was a red book more than, not just a list. According to it, 78% were considered endangered. And according to the IUCN Red List, on the other hand, it was only 73%. With the inclusion of the totality of assessed endemic plant species, accurate information about the conservation status of Ecuadorian vascular plants could be available worldwide. Regarding fungi, there is not much information available. And there is an estimate that we have about 100,000 native species. And the only information we have, it's about 83 endemic species to the Galapagos Island of lichens. For this study on endemic lichens from the Galapagos, they conclude that the largest polyporous for the study on fungi, they conclude the largest polyporous diversity is in Ecuadorian Amazonian, and the order Agaricales, or the group of Agaricales, is most diverse in the Andean region. Same as with fungi, regarding insects, we have almost no information, not even about the number of species there are, so there is no sufficient data. Still, there are colleagues working in several institutions in the country, like the Politécnica Nacional, Catholic University, the Institute for Biodiversity, and one university in southern Ecuador, UTPL. For freshwater and marine fish, there is an estimate for that there are 1,700 native species and 160 endemics. There is no evaluation of the conservation of status of these taxa. Only for freshwater fish, there is 92 endemic species, and there is not much information either about the conservation status. We have here two examples of endemic species of fishes from Ecuador. Now I'd like to introduce you, well, welcome to Diego, who will continue talking a little more about the other animals. Animalia.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Alina. I'm going to explain about the remaining vertebrates. First, the amphibia. First, I want to say that Ecuador has the largest biodiversity of amphibians in the world. Can you look? 638 species in a tiny country. 327 of them are endemics. Recently, 3 years ago, was published the first Red List of the amphibia of Ecuador that includes 53% of the species endangered in some level of threatened. With reptiles, the situation is different. We have 511 species, 174 of them are endemics, and 20 years ago, almost in 2005, was published the first Red List of the reptiles of Ecuador, but no more updates to these days. In the amphibians collaborate 33 researchers, and in reptilia 15. Birds, the situation is different. We have 3 different editions of the Red List. In 1997, 2002, and 2019 was published the different versions. Like amphibians, birds is similar to the country. We have 1,582 species, amazing diversity for a small country, but only 39 of them are endemics. 10% of the species are threatened according to the last publications. In the last version that was published in 2019, 77 researchers collaborate from different institutions in Ecuador, mainly universities, zoological museums, and scientific collections. Mainly, scientific collections was useful for small species with tiny range of distribution. Here we have 2 examples of the hummingbirds. The species to the left was discovered to the science recently in 2018. Both of them are in critical endangered. With mammals, it's a different scenario. We have in Ecuador 471 species, 62 of them are endemics to the country, and we have 3 editions of the Red Book completely with all the information. That includes the first edition in 2001, second edition 2011, and the last edition was published in 2021. 29% of that species in 2021 are endangered. In the last version, contribute more than 120 specialist research, mainly from Ecuador, but for other countries too. What is important for the mammals and their natural history collections is mainly for small species, rodents, bats, opossums, shrews. Because of the species, there's not major information, there's not published information, so the natural history collections are important to know about where the records, how many records, when, the time when was collected. In the national release that was published in 2021, certain species of the small mammals, that is 58%, are included, and most of the information was from natural history collections.
Thank you. Well, we can see here a summary of the various groups, and the most important point that we wanted to mention is that the information that is available in locally published works usually gives you different a message compared to the information that is available in the website, in the IUCN website. This is evident in many groups, and also for some cases we don't have much data, as we can see in insects or fungi or fish. So as conclusions, we can say that there is very important the collaboration amongst local researchers and of course with researchers from abroad, international researchers. And the natural history collections and herbaria are the main source from where we can obtain the data to this conservation status. And information in country evaluations usually provides more accurate information about the conservation status of the local biota. We would like to thank IDIC Bio and Spinach for support for us to come to Japan. And also all the colleagues acknowledge the support from the institutions where we work at. Thank you. Do we?
We'll just save time for questions at the end. We'll save time for questions at the end because we've got extra 50 minutes. So we'll just move on to Diego's talk on the mammals of Ecuador.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lina. I prepared a brief presentation about how is the history, how is the process of the Red Book of the Mammals of Ecuador. In 1996, when I was very young, I finished the university. We start with several colleagues. The first steps to publish a red list of the mammals of Ecuador. At that time, only 11 researchers collaborate. 3 years later, in 1999, this small red list was published as appendix of the book Mammals of Ecuador that I edited, but that red list includes only 38 species evaluated. That was only the 11% of the total mammal species in Ecuador. 1 year later, in 2000, the Ministry of the Environment registered this first red list as an official document in the country. In 2000, with the colleagues that prepared the first red list, we thought that there is not a good job. We need to complete more assessment, more species to include in that edition and prepare the first red book to Ecuador. And we started second time for the workshops to evaluate the conservation status of the Ecuadorian mammals and include 12 research in that new process. 1 year later, the first edition of the red book was published. That includes 170 species evaluated. That was 32% of the total biodiversity. What is the meaning? That 68% was not included in any kind of evaluation at that time. In 2002, the government of Ecuador recognized the red books, the mammals, birds. We have at that time the first edition of the birds and the vascular plants, endemic vascular plants. These 3 red books was recognized by the government as official instruments in conservation in the country, and the new editions that appear in the future. In 2005, I moved to the United States. I was invited to collaborate in the global mammal assessment. What is this? It's a process, a program from the IUCN to evaluate the totality of the mammals in the world. That process was published in 2007 in the website that you know. I was in charge during this process in the assessment of the neotropical mammals. When I returned to Ecuador, I want to continue with the methodology that I learned in the United States and reproduce the same methodology to the local assessment, national assessment. So I prepared the new workshops for also specialists in mammals of Ecuador and include 50 researchers that apport to this new edition. That was published in 2011. That was the second edition of the Red books that include two versions, a hard book, a book that you know, and for first time, an online website that was available. That version evaluates the total species, 100% of the species of the mammals that we know at the time. That was 404 species. This new edition, the second edition of the Red Books, also include different analyses with several distinct information. Mainly, we try to explain how the different categories are in the country. For example, the critical endangered species, we can see in the Galapagos area, include more than 36% of the species are in that area. For example, this concern the green one at the bottom, meaning that more than 60% are in that category. So the most of the species are not threatened in that area. Ten years later, in 2020, we started with some colleagues the new workshops of specialists in mammals Ecuador to update and produce the third edition. At the time, we include more than 120 researchers. That was published in 2021, that was the third edition, and include, like the second edition, a hard book, but only the list, and a website with all the complete information. Also, we again evaluated 100 species of mammals in Ecuador. At the time, 446 species. That was in 2021. Now, 3 years later, we have in Ecuador 471 species. More than exactly 25 new species discovered for Ecuador in only 3 years. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to continue. How is this assessments? We can see in this in the graphic the number of threatened species are increasing according each evaluation from 1996, 2001, 2011, 2021. In every assessment was included more and more threatened species. In the position, the white area include not evaluated species. How is the process on this project? That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Diego. Because we're quite a bit ahead of time now, until I'm meant to be speaking at 3 o'clock, so if we've got any questions about the first two talks, please come up and ask. If we've got no takers, I'll just one for Alina. Just looking at collections not in Ecuador, herbarium collections in particular, because that's your area, have you been able to sort of access information from other collections to get information that would be useful for Red List work?
Yes, thank you. The work that was produced, these assessments, was based mainly on Ecuadorian taxa, Ecuadorian collections, but the Red List, the last one, was in collaboration with the Missouri Botanical Garden, Aarhus University, Gothenburg, and other museums, herbaria outside Ecuador. But there were several Ecuadorian collections that contributed with information. Yeah, so national and international institutions provided the specimens with which you could do all these assessments.
And Diego, similar sort of question. You said before that a lot of the mammal assessments were done based on specimens. So where were those specimens stored? Where were they kept? Were they mostly in Ecuador or spread out?
Okay, we have two scenarios. They are different. In Ecuador, we have new collections from only the last 30 years ago. But the elsewhere collection, mainly in United States, England, some places in Europe, are very old collections with records for more than 100 years, 80 years. That information is useful to us to know historical distribution, where the species were living, but now the species disappeared actually because they are cities, they are agricultural fields, etc. So we are, I think they're complementary. Local collections for new records in the last 30 years, older collections elsewhere for historical records mainly.
Yeah, and hoping that things like GBIF and more digitization, possibly revealing more specimens dating back sort of further. Yeah, it's something that I think we're addressing this in many other symposiums as well, as a major part of increasing access. Right. Okay. Do we have any other questions online or from the audience?
Hello, I'm Lena Struve. I have a question. So I have made a revision published maybe 10 years ago of a plant group, a genus in Ecuador and in Ecuador and southern, and it includes all assessments for each species in there. But how do you go from that revision that is published in the Botanical Journal into all the different assessments in the countries? How do the countries discover that? How do we provide that information in a way that who do we send it to?
So that's more or less what we want. It's the IUCN website. It's the main source that globally it's been consulted. So the Red Book that was produced in 2011 was the result of workshops and collaborations. And between 2011 until now, not much information is being uploaded. So that's what we want now. And actually one colleague was mentioning that they are working on a project to do that, to update the website from the IUCN Red List with information, with most up-to-date information. So yeah, it's I'm sure many publications, many new taxa, they have the conservation status, but I bet it's like 18 days publications, but in the website it's not available. So that's something we do need to have that, and I'm sure it's not only for our country, but for all over. Yeah.
Yeah, so that question was basically what I think kind of inspired the idea for this session, was how people like yourself, museum curators, collections managers, people who know a little bit about a particular taxa can then share that information. I mean, there's many museums around the world, many universities have staff members who already contribute to IUCN Red List assessments, but there's still, I think, there's sort of many who don't know how to. I had hoped originally when we planned the session that we might get some people who'd had more experience doing it to do a basic introduction, but we didn't get that, but not a problem, because as you can imagine now, there's a lot of information online, and there's actually a course run by Nature Conservancy, an IUCN Red List course, which instructs people on how to become an assessor, learn how to pass that information on. So what I was going to do after my talk, I'm going to bring up the website and show you sort of how to sort of sign up for it. It's a free course to do online, a few modules, so hopefully that will be useful.
Okay, I don't want to do a free course online. I don't want to become an assessor. I just want to provide my expertise. I'm the world expert on a group of organisms. I have already done the assessments based on the criteria. I want to give that to you, or IUCN, and then they can decide if they're going to follow that or not, right? So how does that process of me publishing it, and then you have the publication, and then you send it to you with distribution maps, with area of occurrence or whatever, all those different things in there. How do we provide that in an easy just flow to IUCN? And I understand that this is why we're having this session, but this is something that is broken and that's not working, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or I am learning. I am learning how that sort of is going to, how you do that. So that is, I think, the disconnect, because there's so many experts on these groups, and how quick and simple the process is to share that information. And if you're the expert, it's not like when you go to the IUCN, someone else is going to assess this information and decide whether or not it's right, because if you know most about that group, then they'd come back to you and ask you, is this right? So I think that's something we're still working out. I don't represent the IUCN. I'm nothing to the Red List. I'm just curious and want to know how the little bits of information that I have can possibly be useful. My one is more tropical land snails. I know a few species quite well. They're not on the Red List, but I feel they should be. So that's just, I'm going to go through the assessment myself, and if that results in me being able to then share the information, I think that's probably going to be the only way they're ever going to get there anytime soon. So anyway, we'll sort of get into that at the end of the session. But yes, I know what you mean. There's so many courses out there. There's so many things you could be doing, and it's like, when do you have the time?
Actually, that's something we really need as a collections community, to know how to do it. Because if it's not a workshop, then all of this information is being published and then stays published and not uploaded. But yes, that's something, a big thing, that information knowledge that we need to have.
Okay, I think if we can go ahead with my talk, and then we'll move on to the final part. All right. Okay, so my talk's a bit more from the other side of the IUCN Red List, and that's kind of actually using it in a museum setting. So this was just a project I was involved in last year, and it's still kind of ongoing. It's just looking at a way of updating the Hunterian Zoology Museum. So I work at the Hunterian, University of Glasgow, and the Zoology Museum is one of 5 University of Glasgow venues. We've got a main museum with a bit of everything. We've got an art gallery, an anatomy museum, our main store and offices, and then the Zoology Museum. It's in what's known as the Graham Kerr building, or more commonly known as the Zoology building. This was a purpose-built space for zoology. It just had its 100th anniversary last year, and it was designed around having a museum in the middle of the building. The Graham Kerr, after whom it's named, was the first professor of zoology, and he was very keen that the museum would be at the heart of teaching and learning, and so it was set up with a taxonomic display. And you can see here the original layout, lovely skylights, lots of space. The current picture is a bit different. We've lost about half of the floor space. All the area behind those pillars is gone, turned into classrooms. The ceiling's been covered over, and we've now got labs upstairs which occasionally leak on us. So it's quite different from the original plan, but it's still at the heart of the building. The current displays, they date from the late 1980s. They are very much set out in taxonomical order for teaching purposes. Obviously, dating from that far back, a lot of the taxonomy is now out of date. A lot of new phyla have appeared. Old phyla have been subsumed into other orders. So there's a lot of updating I'm doing there as well. But there's no big plans to actually change the museum anytime soon. So I'm just doing what we call interventions, small changes. And obviously, there's not really much information about endangered species in the collections. No Red List information at all. So what we did was going to do an intervention, and this was called the Extinction Crisis Display, and it was inspired by the 2022 United Nations Biodiversity Conference, or COP15, and it was kind of timed to launch around the same time. The questions we asked were which specimens in the museum are threatened, and then how we were going to share that information, how we're going to get that across. So I don't probably need to do too much background on the Red List. I established in 1964, over 163,000 species assessed to date, and 45,000 of these are facing a significant level of threat, and very much useful for guiding conservation effort for governments, for NGOs, all to work on. It's not perfect, but it's certainly a very good start. And you'll be familiar as well with the categories: extinct, extinct in the wild, critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, least concern, and then the bigger categories: not evaluated and data deficient, which covers most, most of life. So the species on display were assessed, and that was about, I think, 500 individual specimens, not including the insects. I have, fortunately, an entomology curator colleague, and she deals with the insects, so I was just dealing with everything else. And this was the breakdown of the categories that are on display. So number of species, we just had one that was in extinct, 12 in critically endangered, 23 endangered, 32 vulnerable, and 17 near threatened. So those are the ones that I was most interested in. Least concern, the majority of the specimens. And then a few other ones, things like long extinct species that didn't count on the list. Quite a few not identified as species, lots of things that are there at either a family or genus level. And then a few domestic animals as well. So out of 366, about, what do you think, 20% or so were a significant level of threat. And the other part I wanted to get across in the intervention was what's causing these extinctions, what threats are. And so we just had a simple numbering system. Number one was changes in land and sea use, the extinction driver. That's just over-harvesting, loss of habitat mainly. Direct exploitation of natural resources, number two, so that was fishing, logging, over-harvesting. Number three, climate change, leading to areas being too wet, too hot, too dry, all different ways to affect wildlife. Pollution, and that's everything from pesticides and herbicides to light pollution, to sewage, plastic pollution. And then invasive species, species introduced on purpose or accidentally into new habitats where they either bring disease or outcompete local species. So those are the main drivers that we wanted to share in the displays. And so what we ended up with was 2 graphic panels, 100 large labels or stickers, and 10 small labels for the insects. And this is the graphic panel, just giving a basic introduction to the Red List, stating the categories and describing the extinction drivers. And then the entrance to the museum, you walk around the corner and you see the main panel. And then you can see here on the side, I'll do with the mouse, the stickers themselves. So these were just put at roughly 1.2 meters, kind of that accessible height for most people, as close to the specimen in the case as possible. And there were a few open display objects like the tuna fish, which would just have its label on a nearby pillar or wherever its label was. And you can see here the typical layout just with the color coding, critically endangered, the name of the species and the extinction drivers below. And for the insects, we had a separate panel, and we focused very much more on the British insects, and it was more the British Red Book list for threatened insects in the UK. And we just had small labels, just a circle, placed next to the insect specimens in their drawers. Just give you some examples of the specimens that were selected. The classic one to start off with, dodo leg. These are actually sort of fossilized dodo bones and toes. They're not from the same animal. The toes came from one animal and the leg came from another. A Bornean orangutan skeleton, I think purchased from a supply company in Paris. And you can see there you've got those extinction drivers along the top. Short-fin mako shark, that's probably the most crowded case, was our Elasmobranchs and Ray's case that had the most stickers for endangered species. Endangered mako shark there. But then a little bit of a good news story, the Arabian oryx, which in the past would have been down as extinct in the wild, but is now just vulnerable. Went from extinct in the wild in the 1970s to over 1,000 individuals in 2011, I think was the last big count. Medicinal leech, for near threatened, bit of an unusual one, having a leech that's actually been assessed. Not many invertebrates get full assessment. And the bluefin tuna, now this one is down as just least concern, but that was the global level. And this was a decision I took, was to just take the global level, because there's quite often within a species, especially a wide-ranging one, you might have near threatened or vulnerable in particular populations, but then overall is a least concern. So I just went for global to avoid getting too confusing and having too many categories. Then another issue here, common green birdwing, as not evaluated. At species level it's least concern, but this subspecies coming from a particular island hasn't been assessed. And that's another issue as well with Red List, is drawing the lines between species and subspecies and what gets assessed. And then finally, data deficient, one of the largest categories. And this one highlights some of the reasons for data deficient. It's pink fairy armadillo, which it's nocturnal, it lives underground, making it very hard to assess. So it's one of these things that people only encounter randomly. And to promote all this, we had social media. We highlighted specimens on Facebook and Instagram. We just show a post each day for a week when the exhibition launched, showing the specimen itself and then a photograph of the animal in the wild, if we could find one. Took ages, but couldn't find one for the dodo. And this was a nice way of just highlighting them around. Also did a focused talk, part of our Hunterian Museum series. We have a talk every Friday lunchtime, and I just gave a summary, which is a longer version really of this talk in many ways. And that's then got put on YouTube, and was quite popular with some of the zoology lecturers who kind of wanted to highlight it more to the students. Did school sessions as well. We had the kids running around the museum, picking their favorite specimens and then finding out what was causing the threats towards them. That was a good way of highlighting the extinction drivers. And then fun things like drawings and poetry. But then the one that I've left kind of still ongoing in the museum right now are just these tours that people can do. So one of them is looking at finding particular individuals and seeing what their extinction level is. Another one is more of a word search. And I was experimenting with these reusable acrylic pouches that you put the tour in and then have a little pen to use it, rather than going through lots and lots of sheets of paper. It's working quite well, but quite often people just take them and use them as a drawing pad and have fun. And so I have found myself spending a lot of time cleaning them up. But people who have used them and told me about them said they're quite enjoyable, they quite like them. And it really got them to think. And they said they're quite hard, but I thought that's the point. You should be doing this with your parent or together, or making the effort. And this was one of my colleagues, Oscar, his niece was in, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. And then the other way we've also been highlighting the displays is through our Bloomberg Connects app. Anyone aware of Bloomberg Connects? Anyone use it in their museums? So this is a free tour thing for the public. We use it in lots of different spaces in our museum. And it's a smartphone app, and you can go in, pick a particular tour, and find out more information about a specimen. So I made one up for the extinction crisis, and it meant that on 10 of the specimens had this extra number, and that meant you could go in, activate the tour, key in the number, and then find out more information. And it'd normally be a mix of a little audio file, just listening to a bit of a description, and a couple of extra photographs as well. And the good thing is you can do this through the app, even if you're not at the museum. You can find the tour and you can have a look at it all. So that was experimental. I'm still waiting to get more feedback on how well this has been used. But if anyone is interested, this is the code for the Hunterian's app. It's free to sort of download. And you also can see there's hundreds of other museums around the world that also have tours. So it's a nice way of doing virtual touring of collections. So the assessment, this was kind of not a formal assessment, more just from speaking with people and speaking with guests and visitors. Generally well received, but my biggest problem was the extinction driver number system wasn't quite clear enough. This was something I'd kind of discussed with our designer, and he was we weren't quite sure how to do this. He just went with numbers. I think in hindsight, we'd have been better going with little symbols, logos for each type of extinction thing. But fortunately, because these are just stickers, it should be quite easy to do a new print run and replace them. But ultimately, the point of exposing the Red List to the general public and students certainly worked. And there's been some good feedback from them. So I'd just like to say acknowledgements to iDigBio for with funding for getting here, and Spinach and Tedwig for running another wonderful conference. But yes, thank you for listening. Did I have one more? Oh yes, I did. And we did have one, I forget the name, the Japanese giant spider crab. Unfortunately, it's a not evaluated one. But yes, any questions?
Thanks, Mike. That's really interesting to see all the work you did in that space and how it's evolved over time, too. It's nice to have a modern, what did you call it? When you were fixing something up in there.
The intervention.
The intervention, yeah. It's nice to see
Yeah.
such a nice intervention there. So I was curious what the general audience is, because you said it's at a university.
Yeah.
And then but it's open to the public.
Yes.
You showed the young girl there. So
Yeah.
who's your general audience?
So it is a strange situation with the Zoology Museum because it's quite deep within the Zoology department. We are open to the public Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, when the building's open to staff and students. And when people do find it, they feel like they discovered a hidden treasure because you have to walk through a department, past labs, past classrooms, and when you get there, it's well, students are in there, they're studying, they're using the space, but it is fully accessible and it is advertised as part of the Hunterian's campus museum tours, and so we do get quite a range. We get a lot of international tourists. We do get quite often local visitors as well. But because I'm not open at the weekend, it's more, I would say, international tourists than the locals. And I would certainly love to encourage more school visits and local visits. But our education team and our management at the moment is focusing more on families rather than school groups. So we don't have a huge number of dedicated school visits. It's only if a group asks, we don't go out and pitch ourselves to schools. But I would love to get more kids coming in. But certainly when they do, they always enjoy it. That's as far as I see. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Nope. And nothing online. Right. Okay. So I'm going to switch over to my computer. So this is what I mentioned before. Because we didn't get anyone sort of offering to do a talk, and I couldn't find anyone to come and do a talk and exactly how to go about doing this, I found this place, Conservation Training website, and it has all sorts of courses they can do. Many of them connected to other enrollment, other projects, but there's the one, the IUCN Red List Assessor Training, that I actually sort of signed up for recently. And as you can see here, available in English, Spanish, and French, and it all gives you several modules to go through online. I actually did the topic 1 module just a couple of days ago out of curiosity. I haven't sort of had the time to finish yet, but it really is sort of starting out quite straightforward and just gives you a background, videos, and various other lessons. And you can sign up to it for free, just going in through the login. Where's the last one? Yeah, I think I'm logged in already, but yeah, so you can just go to this front page and sign up. And I think they used to do, they probably still do, workshops at the IUCN. Sort of, I've been Red List Assessor training, going out to many places. And I think, although they still do it, obviously people all over the world in many different places might find it hard to attend a course in person. So I'm guessing this is probably the best first step for many people, is to go through this and then see quite how much it would need. So looking there, global assessors, 6 modules to complete, regional assessors, a few less. So I don't know if that'd be most relevant for you. So, only 4 modules to do, maybe worth having a look. But I'm certainly going to work through it and see if I can make my little contribution for the few species that I think I know well enough to add to the list. But like all IUCN Red List stuff, it changes and gets updated all the time. but some species are never going to get on there unless someone makes the move and starts adding them. So I think it's time to take the plunge personally. So yeah, so that's the Nature Conservancy. Conservationtraining.org is the home address, and you can search from there. Okay. Yep.
I was just thinking that, I don't know the level of this course, but this might be something that advanced undergraduates and graduate students would be really interested in taking and then add it to their CVs.
Yeah, I think it'd certainly be something good to know, so that when they do progress and actually get to know particular species better, they've got that in the back of the mind on knowing, right, so when I'm doing this, what information do I need to help build an assessment up? But I think it is aimed more at people who've already got a bit of knowledge about a particular species. But yeah, certainly getting in at the student level and getting them aware of it would certainly be a good way to go.
So how do people find out about these things, and how do we find out from you how well this is done and how
don't know.
easy
I'm
it
still
is?
learning.
How are you going to tell us?
I'll have to come back next year and yeah. But yeah, so just I think this. I found this from digging around, but there's also lots of stuff on the IUCN website itself. So yeah, hopefully in a few years' time, I'll be able to give a session here that actually covers the assessment process and how I went through that. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. And I'm so glad we got an extra talk in there. But yes. Okay. Arigato.